Hey everybody, welcome to the course on creating a marketplace app. This is especially going to be useful for those of you who have never built an app before using Adalo. Maybe you've never even played around with databases or anything like that. I hope that that you find this helpful. But we're going to create a marketplace app that closely mimics Craigslist or OfferUp or Facebook Marketplace. Those types of apps, that's primarily what we're going to be building here. But don't think that that's the only application for the principles that you're going to learn. These principles can be used across many different types of apps, from real estate apps to restaurant apps, dating apps even. So these principles you can take and apply them to multiple different types of apps. Um, but I did want to, before we jump in here, I did want to kind of show kind of what we want to do with this app and kind of where we're going to go. So if you'll see in video one, this is video one, we'll look at the app capabilities, so what we want our app to do. We'll look a little bit at branding it and talk a little bit about that. We'll look at the Adalo interface and the builder portion of it and go through that. And then finally, we'll look at the database and how to set up a database and explain a little bit about the different facets of that. All right, so that's kind of where we're headed. That said, I typically always do this for any app that I make. I always create a document of some kind, a guiding document to help me stay on course with my app and what I want to do with it. And then also this I can put style information in here about the font that I want to use, the colors that I'm using, so that if I have to go back and make changes later, or if I'm building promotions about it, I can make my branding consistent across the board. So it's always good to have a document about this. Now, this particular document is housed in Notion, and it's really a document for the course in general, but ideally you'd want to make this about your app. So that said, let's look at some of the capabilities that we want our app to do. So in thinking about the Craigslist app or maybe the OfferUp app, we want users to be able to post items that they want to sell into a marketplace, and then allow people to browse and scroll through that marketplace, find items, and search for items that they may be interested in by category maybe or by keyword, find that item, and then actually contact the seller of that item in order to arrange a meetup to exchange money for the item, right? So going off of kind of what we want, that's the end goal. These are kind of some of the basic capabilities that we want. We want to be able to the user to post items with multiple pictures. We want to have profile screens, both where we can view someone else's and where we can edit our own. We want to just have a basic, very, very basic messaging system between the buyer and the seller. We want to maybe have just a very basic, simple notification that is sent to either the buyer or the seller, like say for instance when they receive a message about their item. We want them to be able to browse items and then search for those items. And then we also may want to have categories that those items belong into, so that people can filter and search and those types of things. Some of these we're just going to stay, because of time constraints, we're going to stay fairly basic with all of these functions. But hopefully it will give you some idea and of how to set yours up. And like I said, a lot of those principles carry over into more advanced areas as well. If this is not your first time using Adalo, hopefully this will be a good refresher for you, and hopefully maybe you'll learn something new along the way as well, I hope. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. We'll jump over here to our Adalo platform, and if you've never used Adalo before, at some point it will send you to this screen where it's asking you what kind of app you want to make. If you have used Adalo before, you'll want to create a new app to get to this screen. I'm just going to click Native Mobile App here. And then you can start with a template, right, when you're building your app, but I find that it's actually a little bit more difficult to start with a template because you have to learn how the template works in order to kind of modify it to fit your needs. So for me, that's just for me, starting with a template is sometimes harder. So I'm actually just going to choose this blank option here and then click Next. And so this app is actually going to be called Swap Meet. Oops, if I can spell it right. Swap Meet, and this is going to be on my team, part of several different teams here, but this is going to be on my team. If you're just now using Adalo, it'll be your team by default. But and then let's make this color. Let's make it. We can adjust this a little bit later on, but let's just make the default color like a green color, I think is what I have. So something around in there, and then let's make the secondary color like maybe black. All right. And again, you can make this however you want. You don't have to do this. This is just to match the logo that I have made. So I'll click Create here. And you can see it's already set me up with some screens here, and we'll get to that in just a second. But first, let's go through kind of the Adalo interface and what each of these things does along here. And we'll kind of look at some things, and then we'll get more in-depth into these sections here. All right, so starting up here in this top left, you've got this massive Add button. And the Add button is basically where you can add any kind of component or screen to your project. There's all sorts of different options. Let me move my face here so that you can see. There's all sorts of options here for you to add different components. You can add different types of screens, lists, and different things like that. So that's what the Add button does. This button down below here, you have your branding. So this is going to be your colors, where you can change your primary, secondary, the background color of your app, and even the default text color here. In this tab here, we have all of our screens listed, and from here we can get to kind of a hierarchy of the different components that are on each screen. And then down below that we have our database tab, and we'll get a little bit deeper into this in just a second, but just know that this tab here will take you to the database. And below that we have our settings tab, which is where we can adjust the app name, add a description to it. We can add an app icon, which is actually what I'm going to do right now. All right, so I like that. Let's see, it's not a terribly good icon. I just whipped it up really quick, and you can, make your own icon using Canva or Adobe Spark or whatever, but this is just kind of what we got right now. You can optionally change the display settings. I'll go ahead and save this icon. You can change the display settings, so if you want to be able to see how these screens are connected with these little lines here, you can do that. You can also change the app access here, and then also copy and delete the app. You've also got underneath that the Publish tab, where you can publish it to as an Android file, or actually download the Android file, and then publish to the iOS store as a test flight build. And then you can also publish it just as a progressive web app, which is like a link that you could download to your phone and install on your home screen. All right, so those are kind of the options there. This is the share view. So actually, it's you can get to that through this share button here as well. But it will actually take you to this screen where you can share the app with a link, or send the link through a text message. And then you can also install it to your phone screen by scanning this QR code as well. You can also just use the this is a completely usable version of the app right here in the browser too, which is pretty cool. All right, so that's pretty much the Adalo interface here. I want to talk a little bit about the functions of Adalo, the three main functions, and they're kind of defined by these three colors here, this kind of green, teal color, this yellow, and this red. So if you can think about this, the blue is primarily the visual aspects of it. So you'll notice that when I click on this, I have anything that is visual, that is just a design component, is going to be labeled in blue, right? So I've got screens are kind of in this blue color or this green, and then I've got my components that are in this kind of green color here. And then your red is kind of denoting the database side of things. So this is going to be the brains behind what you're doing, the memory behind what you're doing. Without a database, an app is quite frankly useless. So it's super critical here. And then the third component is this yellow component here, which is kind of the actions of Adalo. And actions are these kind of actions. I don't really know how else to say it. That happen when a person or a user clicks on a given component, and quite often they link what's on the screen with something that's in the database. So these are kind of the connector between the visual aspect and the data portion of Adalo. All right, so without actions, you have no real relationship between the visual aspect and the data aspect. So if you can think about that, you've got your visual, your database, and then your actions. Those are kind of the trinity of what makes Adalo work. And really anything, it's just Adalo has kind of narrowed it down to those three things. All right, so let's go ahead and start working on our database. But before we actually start building it out, I want to explain a little bit about how the database works. And if you've never used a database before, the easiest way to explain it is to explain it in terms of a spreadsheet. And I want to make the distinction that a spreadsheet is not a database, or vice versa. But they do share similarities. They just function differently. So a spreadsheet, if you can think of Google Sheets or Microsoft Excel, when you open up that file, you have a bunch of information in there. And that's kind of how the database functions. It's like an Excel file or a Google Sheets file that's holding all this information, right? And then within that file, you have sheets, right? So on an Excel spreadsheet, you'd have the tabs at the bottom saying Sheet 1, Sheet 2, Sheet 3. And the way that Adalo kind of calls this, and a lot of other databases, they call this collections. So if you can think of each sheet across there as being a collection, and then within each of those, you have your column headers, right? So if I click on a sheet in Excel, it's going to open up, and maybe there's different column headers there. And underneath each of those columns, there's going to be rows, right, of information underneath those column headers. And if I click on this collection here called users, you'll see that each of these would be like a column header in that spreadsheet. And it's a little bit easier to understand if I click on this records right here. You can see that it's already kind of started to format it like a table. So these would be my column headers, and then all of my rows of data would go up underneath this. So this would be one user. This would be, you'd have a second row that says the second user, and so on and so forth. All right, and each cell in the row is linked to the ones beside it. So unlike Excel, where you can change, one cell, and then the cell right beside it you can change, right, to something completely different. You can do that here, but the rows are actually all linked together. So all that information is tied together in a record. All right, so that's kind of how that works. I do want to talk a little bit about the properties. So underneath the properties, you've got several different types here. You've got a text property, which is like a string of letters, numbers, symbols, even emojis, Unicode characters. A text field can literally hold pretty much anything that you want to put in it. That said, it cannot do calculations. So if you're wanting to calculate something off of a text field, you can forget it because it won't do it. The number field, however, is exactly what it sounds like. It will hold integers, so 1, 2, 3, 0, -1, things like that. And it can also hold decimals, so 1.2, 1.5, things like that. And the nice thing about this is that you can actually do calculations with it. So you can use parentheses, the old PEMDAS, acronym to help you do parentheses and things like that. You can do multiplication with it. You can do division, and there's even some advanced functions like absolute value, uh, generating random integers, things like that that you can do as well. True false is exactly what it sounds like. It's either true or it's not. This is what in programming you call a Boolean field. But there's lots of uses for this. Date and time is exactly what it sounds like. It's just a date and time field. And date is exactly what it sounds like as well. It's just a date field. And the cool thing about the date field is that you can actually calculate dates with it. So if I give it a date and I say, okay, 5 days from this date, I can add 5 days to whatever date I put in there, which is cool. The image field is exactly what it sounds like. It's just an image property that will store an image for you to use. The file property can store, PDFs, PowerPoints, documents, pretty much even zip files you can store in here. So this can hold lots of different things. And then the real power comes in where we start creating relationships. And this is often the part that people have the biggest issue, if you will, the biggest struggle. And what a relationship does is it takes two different collections and it creates a link between them. And what this link allows us to do is it allows us to look up data about the opposite collection through that link. So if you can imagine, two houses, right? And we have those aluminum can phones, right, with a string in between. Well, until I actually create the string or have a link between the two houses, the people in the houses can't really talk to each other. But once they do, they can share information in both directions as much as they want, and that's kind of what a relationship does. So say, for instance, we had a collection of users, and let's go ahead and add another collection, since this is a marketplace app where we're selling items. Let's go ahead and create another collection called items. And each item has a creating user, right? Someone who added it to the app. So what we would want to do is actually create a relationship to the user's collection. So instead of the temptation here is to say to just make it a text field and say creating user, right? Or user who added it, right? Or something like that. And you can certainly do this, but it becomes much harder if you don't have a link between the two, because then I can't look up information about who added this because there's no link there. So we'll just leave this for name, but let's add a property here with the relationship to the users. So what Adalo does is it asks you, how are users and items actually related to each other? So a user can have multiple items, right? But an item only can belong to one user, which in this case, this is probably what it's going to be. Because I can add multiple things that I want to sell, but each thing that I add belongs to me. So it's probably going to be this first one. But in certain circumstances, you may have to use, something where a user can only have one item, right? And an item can have multiple users, say if they're renting something out or something to that effect. So it's always good to kind of think about this, and we will add many more of these here in just a second. Let's go ahead and click on this one. So now that I have the property added, let's go ahead and rename this to exactly what it does. So let's change this to creating user. So this will be the user that created whatever the item is. And you'll notice that if I click on the users collection, there's another, it automatically creates another field called items for me. And this would be the items that they have created. So if I create a relationship in one field, it automatically creates the property in the next one for me. So I needed to go back in and make sure that I name it correctly so that I can identify it, right? So let's name this created items. Okay. And let's just go ahead and start building this out, I think. So we've got users, we've got items. And one of the biggest hurdles for a lot of people is deciding what needs a collection, right? How do I know when to create a collection? Um, and I think what we should do is probably go over here to our capabilities and check this out and see what would qualify for a collection. And two rules of thumb that I like to use are if it can be listed, it needs its own collection, and if it's visible, it needs its own collection. So the first one, if it can be listed, right? Messaging, we can list messages. Messages can be listed. Notifications, those can definitely be listed. Items, absolutely, they can be listed within the app. Categories, we can list categories. Users, obviously, we've already got that one. So all of those we may need collections for. And then the second one, if it's visible, a lot of people think that you may need to create a collection for likes. For instance, if I like a post or if I like a picture or if I like an item. But really, you can't list likes. You can list posts that people liked or items that people liked, but you can't list likes because it's a vague kind of nebulous idea. Like what is a like? It's not a visible, tangible thing. Um, so those are kind of the two rules there. If you can list it, and if it's a visible thing, right? So let's go ahead and create some of these collections here. So we've got users, we've got items. Let's see, what else did we say? We've got users, items, messages maybe. So let's create one for messages. Right, and let's see what else we got. We won't actually create a collection for notifications just because this is kind of a time-consuming process to set up. Um, but we will actually initiate just a simple notification. We'll show you how to set that up as well. So items, we've already got that. Categories, let's go ahead and set up one for categories. Oops, if I can spell right. Categories. All right. And that looks pretty good. Let's just see. So items with, oh, okay, so here we go. Multiple pictures. All right. So within our items collection, we could absolutely, just add just a single image field, right? But this would make it so that the person could only upload one image per item. So you may say, well, um, maybe I want them to be able to upload multiple images, so I'll just add multiple image properties, right? I mean, you can certainly do that. If you want to have, let them upload 10 different images, you can certainly do that. But I think probably a better way to do this, let's just get rid of these. Let's just create another collection for images only. So let's call this item images. All right, and then what we can do is we can create a relationship to what item that particular image belongs to. So let's do that. Let's add a property here with the relationship to the items. So an item can have multiple item images. This is probably the one we want. An item image belongs to one item, right? So this is kind of the one that we're wanting to choose here. So we have a collection, a list of item images, and then each image belongs to an item. And then same thing, it has actually created one here. You can see where it says item images. And then at some point we can be able to list these out, right? So let's think about some of the other properties that we may need to include here. So maybe I want to be able to display just the person's first name, not their full name. So maybe we would want to add a text field here, and we'll say first name. Maybe I want to put a phone number in here, maybe, right? So we can do that. Maybe their birthday, right? To see, make sure that they're old enough to be on the platform. Date of birth. And then maybe like an about section so that they can add, an about or a bio maybe. Let's see, there may be some other options here. Oh, we need a relationship to the items, right? Okay, so we've got that, created items. Let's see. Yeah, I think that's a good start. We may have to come back and add some later, and that's fine. You may always have to go back and add more things as you build your app. You'll always have to go back to the database and adjust and delete and add things in, and that's okay. That's just part of the process. Okay, so users looks pretty good. Let's go into items here and let's make this so the item definitely has a name. It has a creating user. It has some images related to it. Let's add maybe a price. So we'll just add a number field, right? Item has to have a price. And let's maybe add a description. So this will be a text field. All right, description. Let's see, what else maybe we want? Maybe a location. So like where the item is located. Right? And again, there may be some other things that we need to add here, but we can certainly go back in and add them later if we want to. So messages, and the easiest way to think about some of this is to think about, when I look at the messages on my phone, what pieces of data do I see there? So I see maybe not a name, but maybe this is like the message text, right? And maybe I have, who sent it. So we would need a relationship to the user's collection to see who sent that message. So a user can have multiple messages, but a message only belongs to one sending user. It only has one sender. So let's choose this first one here. And again, always rename it. Naming conventions are important here. Sending user, so you don't get confused. Yeah, so I think that's good for that. One thing to note is that Adalo actually creates a created field and an updated field for you. And these are just date fields so that you can know you don't actually have to put those in. Those are just automatically there for you, which is nice, right? Categories, this is kind of interesting. So a category would have a name, right? And then maybe it has a property relationship to the item, right? Because each item can belong to a category. So let's go ahead and add a relationship to the items. So, and this part is kind of up to you. So you could say it's probably not going to be this first one because a category doesn't only have one item. But it could honestly be either of these. So an item can only have one category, or a category can have multiple items. That's true. Or if you want an item to be able to be added to multiple categories, like say you have an outdoor sprinkler system that somebody's selling, or a robot lawnmower, that could go under electronics and outdoor lawn and garden, right? So that may be two categories, but for now I'm just going to stick with this first one here just to keep it simple. So an item belongs to one category, right? And you'll see that if we go back to the items collection, it has created a category automatically for us since it's linked. And then item images, I think we've pretty much got this here, except for the fact that we need to actually add an image property here. So let's go ahead and add an image here. And the name, we're not really going to use this, but we can't actually delete it because it's the initial property there. So you can really name this whatever you want, and we may even just leave it blank, not even use this property, and that's okay. All right, so I think that's it for our database. We will probably need to go back in and modify this as we build, but that's okay. It's typically a good idea to think through each of your database and how you want it to function before you start building, so that as you build you don't have to go back as much to add things to the database and change things and all that kind of stuff. It makes it a whole lot easier to build when you already have a lot of this stuff here. So we'll definitely have to go back. We'll definitely have to add more, maybe take some away, modify it a little bit, but that's just part of the process. All right, we'll see you in the next one.